Greetings, friends. We are recording this morning with Reverend Dr. Todd Adams. It is an early start here in Sydney. It's a 6 a.m. recording, and I'm just so pleased that we were able to make the technology and time zones work. So I heard Todd in the Common Table conference, and honestly, it was a gripping start. When Todd read out his story of being in ministry, I was gripped. I was fixated with what he was saying, and I just knew that I had to invite him to the podcast. Todd calls himself a self-proclaimed recovering local church pastor. I think you even said that at one point being addicted to pastoral ministry. You left congregational ministry and you're currently president and CEO of Pension Fund of the Christian Church, where you're actually at a more strategic level now, facilitating care and support for ministry workers. And I'm hoping today we can find out more about the Cornerstones project and just in general, your story and your heart for ministry and pastors. Welcome, Todd.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here with you. I get the advantage. It's at the end of my day here in Indianapolis. So 4 p.m. my time. So it's dinner's up next.
Fantastic. So, Todd, you shared a story with us at the gathering. It's your story, and I was wondering if we might start with that. Could you tell us a bit about your pastoral ministry story?
Absolutely. So when I say in recovery, 19 years since I've served as a local church pastor, and the congregation that I was serving in Houston, it was a great congregation. It had kind of that typical cycle that it had been a large church that had declined pretty significantly. I doubled the number of kids on my first Sunday because I brought two with me, one who was born on the way in the middle of the move from West Virginia to Houston. And we were growing so fast that we needed to build a new building.
Well,
We had expanded the staff. We'd expanded our ministries. We had 60, 70 children on a Sunday morning now. We had a robust youth program, fully funded, multi-million-dollar budget, and things were really headed in the right direction. But it was an addiction for me. It was a work addiction. It was I think I shared in Houston at the conference that getting called at 3 o'clock in the morning was kind of like getting hearts and likes on social media. Needing to still be the church being big enough that we had multiple ministers on staff, but yet small enough that I was still the pastor to everybody.
well,
And I really was meeting myself coming and going, like most ministers who hit that stage of being on the brink of burnout. I decided to start a Doctor of Ministry program in the middle of building a $3 million sanctuary and renovation of our existing facilities. Why not add on commuting to Washington, D.C. For 4 intensive weeks a year and back and forth between the two? And again, because I was supposedly, I guess, superhuman, at least in my own self-assessment, if somebody died during the week, I flew home on Friday night instead of taking that weekend break in Washington, D.C. Officiated a funeral. Well, if I'm home, I might as well preach on Sunday morning, right? And then fly back to DC on Sunday afternoon and start back in class all week. And I traded in my sabbatical to do that. But I think the part of the story you're probably most interested in is what I would say is my Sunday that I broke. And that week we had 4 funerals. 4 charter members of the church had passed away. So 4 really large funerals. I had a late 30s, early 40-year-old member of the congregation diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. And we had a 12-year-old who is still with us today, who's the longest living survivor of a hypothalamic brain tumor in an infant. And her family had received the news that her brain tumor had started to grow again. They also happened to be our best friends and our kids' best friends. And so very personal in being present with them, trying to navigate the space and trying to figure out how you tell a 12-year-old that you're going to start a treatment cycle again when things had been pretty stable to that point. And on that Sunday, so 4 funerals, the way the congregation said, I had my group over here to my right that they cried at everything. I had my older group in the middle, and it was their lifelong friends that we had just celebrated their lives that week. And then I had my young adult section over here, and that's where Maddie's parents were sitting, and that's where the Courtney, who had been diagnosed with breast cancer, was sitting, and they all knew what was going on. So they're crying, as Madison, who has the brain tumor, is singing, I Am a Promise. And I am trying to find my safe space in the sanctuary. And I realize I'm seated right now, but I'm 6'5", 240 pounds. So I'm not a small person. I do not hide well. And I am sitting on the chancel by myself. And I'm doing the tears running down the side. And then I'm doing the shoulder shrug, trying to fight it off. And the last line of the song is God knows my name and everything's going to be okay. And so Maddie, who was up there belting it out, her Make-A-Wish trip was to sing on stage with Shania Twain, regular soloist at the church, just singing out with all of her heart, knows none of this is going on, stomps her foot on the chancel and says, and God knows my name and everything's going to be okay. And I broke. I could not stop, like that convulsing, sobbing, shaking, crying. And I was supposed to preach next.
Mm.
And was also sitting there by myself and nobody knew what to do. So I stood up. I tried to start the sermon. I tried to read the scripture. I consider myself a very composed person in these moments, and I could not gain my composure. I was exhausted. I was burning out, and I was overwhelmed by the grief that I was carrying for 500 people. And I think that's part of what we don't often talk about, is the grief that pastors are carrying, and that there's nowhere for that to go. And so I stood up, I opened my Bible, I tried to start reading the scripture, and I just turned around and I looked at the organist and I said, just play the communion hymn. And I sat back down and nobody moved.
Yeah.
Finally, one of the chaplains, who was a member of the church, came up and said, how can I help? And I said, just take over the service and close it out. And so Bill took over. But that for me was the moment in which I knew I could not continue at the pace that I was going. It was the moment I knew in which I had a problem being addicted to being all things to all people in all places and all times and spaces. I am a person of endless energy, but I broke.
Mm.
And where was I supposed to go? Who was I supposed to talk to about this? The person who was going to write a reference for me eventually somewhere to move somewhere else? The leadership of the church? I didn't know how to have the conversation. I didn't know what I needed. And I knew that I didn't have anywhere to go to speak. And so that's why I'm passionate about the work that we're able to do at Pension Fund around clergy health and wellness, in addition to being the denomination's retirement provider.
Yeah. That's quite a picture of helplessness and
Mhm.
loneliness in a very public setting. It's a Sunday morning, and it's probably the last and worst place you want to have it all collide on you and collapse on you. I'm surprised and not surprised that you were by yourself and it took a while before someone came up to you. At that point in time in your ministry, is that also what was happening at an everyday level, just on your own, soldiering on?
Yeah, I mean, I think ministry is one of the most isolating roles that anybody can fill. And there's this concept of switching too, that adds to it, that in one moment you're at somebody's bedside, helping them, being present with them in a family while they're transitioning from this life to the next. And then you walk into an endowment meeting, and then you walk into a building committee meeting, and then the preschool director walks in while you're preparing your sermon and says, hey, the toilet's overflowing, come help. And you're constantly switching through all of these roles. But there's so many confidential conversations you have as a local church pastor, and you carry that trauma and those grief for those members, and you carry it with a commitment that it is confidential. So you don't talk to your spouse about it. And I didn't have a spiritual director. And so it becomes more and more isolating. And so I think the visualization of me sitting there by myself on the chancel is really emblematic of the challenge that all pastors face, because most of the people who are there to support us have also something else to do with our future placement, our future call, our future place of ministry. And so how vulnerable can you really be? And there's kind of this expectation that I was supposed to have it all together. So what happens when I don't?
Yeah. Yeah, that was something that came up, as we were conducting a wellbeing program for a team, a ministry team. Psychological safety, as it is understood in a corporate setting, but in a church setting, it's really messy. Just the setup is not necessarily conducive to be psychologically safe. For all the things that you just said, it's not just your job or your livelihood that's attached to it, it's your home, your friendships, your sense of faithfulness to Christ himself. It's all attached there. And so if you put up your hand and you say, yeah, I'm not really feeling all that great, it's a really costly space to be in and not easily resolved either, I think, in ministry.
Right. Right. And it's tough to be vulnerable where people are looking to you to have the answers to life's challenges.
Now, when you told that story, I think there were so many points in there. And interesting, even for me, in the last maybe 3 months, I've spoken to ministry workers more and more about grief and an emotion that they probably hadn't noticed or labeled for themselves before. But even for you, talking about ministry from years ago on the other side of the world, you're talking about very similar things. In the one instant, you're holding the grief of a young person, then a child who wants desperately and in probably in that season of life believes that it's all going to be well. Another segment of your group, and I think as a pastor yourself, grieving a long-standing, well-loved member of your church. That grief is expansive, isn't it? And you may be the only person that knows and is holding everybody's grief at that
Right.
one point in time.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you hold, as a pastor, you hold the grief of the family whose child attempted suicide. You hold the grief of a family, of a couple whose marriage is struggling after 40 years because infidelity has been discovered. You hold the grief of people's illnesses that they don't want it to be public. You hold your own grief as just a human being, right? As we go through the daily events of life. I had been at the church 9 months on 9/11. So being in Houston, where the city was evacuated, where the preschool director's coming in and saying, we've got to shut down and get our kids out of here, you hold that grief. You hold the grief of the wider church. You hold the grief of what's going on geopolitically in the world. You hold the grief of basic life and death of, I had a couple come in and talk to me because they had a high risk pregnancy. And they wanted to know that their church would support them if they had to terminate the pregnancy because of they were going to have a bunch of testing done. And they were asking, would I be able to support them in making that decision? And cried for so long to have children again. And so you were holding the grief of that are trying to start a life, of couples that are trying to figure out if they want to stay married to each other, let alone all of the normal things that go on every single day. And that's not unique to my situation as a pastor. That is, every pastor is
Yeah.
carrying that trauma and that grief for their community, both those who are part of the faith community and those that are in the community around the church.
Yeah. This does not sound like something you want to be addicted to. So I'm wondering, you said that you're addicted. What were you necessarily?
Being
Yeah.
needed. I'm an Enneagram too, so I'm the perfect person to need to be needed, right? But I was addicted to being needed. I was addicted to being omnipresent. I was addicted to having the schedule where people would say, "How are you physically able to do all of this? How are you here, but you were just there?" I was addicted to people joining the church every week. I was addicted to this children's and youth ministry program that was just rapidly growing and expanding. I was addicted to the church needing to build a new sanctuary. I was addicted to adding staff. I was addicted to being the poster child of a healthy, growing congregation. But it really comes down to I was addicted to that need to be needed. The kids' friends called me the Todd father because there
Oh,
was no separation between Todd, the pastor of the church, and Todd, the parent, Todd, the spouse, Todd, somebody's child, Todd, the human being. I was all one and the same. And it becomes this, it's kind of like the challenges with social media today where, oh, I got 500 likes on that post. Well, now next time I've got to do something to get 600 likes. It's that human need. And the church was flourishing as a result of it while I was slowly chipping away at myself
yeah.
inside.
So what happens after this? What happens after that morning? Where does the story and the journey go?
And so about 2 months later, a colleague reached out and I was starting the writing phase of my dissertation for my doctorate. The building was built. I was starting to question whether I had another kind of 7-year run with this congregation in my mind, thinking in terms of the cycles of ministry. And a colleague reached out and they were posting a position that basically was to be the denomination's chief financial and chief administrative officer. Long title, Associate General Minister and Vice President for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the United States and Canada.
Wow.
Put that on your business card. And they said, I really think you ought to think about this.
Okay.
And so what became next was actually exiting pastoral ministry because I could not see the way forward, not out of embarrassment or not out, but I just couldn't see how I could continue the pace, but I couldn't see how I could do it any other way. And so I went into the administrative side of serving the church. And then I've been doing that now for 19 years, including in my 11th year now, my current role as the president of our pension fund.
Yeah. Could you introduce us to the pension fund and then we'll talk about the Cornerstones program? That's
Sure.
okay.
So we are a 131-year-old organization. We manage $4 billion in retirement assets for 14,000 pastors and church workers in the U.S., Puerto Rico, and Canada. But we have a legacy of a program called Ministerial Relief and Assistance. So we started in 1895 by responding to a pastoral family in crisis. Ira Chase was the pastor of Wabash Christian Church in Wabash, Indiana. He died unexpectedly, leaving a blind widow and 4 orphan children. Brother A.M. Atkinson, who was a leader in the Christian church in Indiana, raised an offering of $3,700 and purchased a home for Rhoda Jane Castle Chase that was measured as 3 squares from the church in Wabash. And she accepted that home on the condition that $1,000 would go back to the Chase Fund at her death from the sale of the home. And that began the Board of Ministerial Relief and Assistance. That fall, we raised another $5,000. So from very humble beginnings to $4 billion today. But we also steward about $85 million through our relief funds. So we help our low-income retirees with supplemental gifts and Medicare supplements. We help our pastors when there are life emergencies, medical disasters. Somebody's home gets hit by a tornado. We step in to make sure that the pastor has resources and a support network around them. We pay dues for pastors called to military chaplaincy during times in which they have been called up to active service. So there are 19 programs that are under the umbrella of Ministerial Relief and Assistance that is the core of our DNA. And one of those programs that I inherited was called Excellence in Ministry, funded by the Lilly Endowment, and it was a financial literacy program. We got to the end of 3 grants from the Lilly Endowment and said, all right, what's next? How do we make this part of who we are today? How do we evolve the program and what's next? And out of that grew the Cornerstones project that we were there to speak about and that we'll be applying now for some additional funding from the Lilly Endowment as well. But it was a $2 million investment in the financial, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being of pastors in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ here in the U.S.
I just want to ask you about financial literacy to begin with. So that story of how the pension fund or the origins of the story, fast forward now, what are some of the issues that we see in the financial life or the financial reality of our ministry?
So the biggest piece that we uncovered in all of this is shame and guilt around self-perceived financial illiteracy and the amount of debt that our pastors are carrying, life-crushing debt. Because a lot of our pastors go to our church-related schools, which are private colleges. Some of them are as high as $75,000, $80,000 a year. And the last 20 years, the scholarship support for people pursuing ministry has diminished greatly relative to the cost of attendance at those undergrads. So they have a tremendous amount of undergrad debt. And then they were going to seminary. And while most of our seminaries pay a good portion of the tuition, some as much as 100%, it still costs you money to live while you're in seminary. So they're borrowing money, going into credit card debt, coming out 6 figures in debt from, earning their master's degree, and then going to serve congregations, paying them $50,000 a year, thinking that that's a great salary, and they can't afford to make their student loan payments, let alone put food on the table. So the financial literacy program was really centered on helping pastors have healthy conversations with their families, their spouse, but also with their community of faith around the economic reality of pastoral ministry today, helping them learn skills for negotiating compensation, helping to establish household budgeting. They had a financial companion, helping them negotiate appropriate compensation and look for resources in their local community that could be comparable. Like my salary in Houston was set based off the superintendent of our local school district because that was a 12-month employee with a public salary schedule. And so we looked to that as a basis to say, here's somebody with similar years of experience, similar academic credentials that are required, similar levels of responsibility, and let's use that then as compensation criteria. But shame and guilt around the financial position of many of our clergy was really one of the biggest learnings that we didn't plan for in developing that curriculum. But it certainly rose to the top. And we would actually bring in a counselor, a social worker, and therapist to work with and do a whole session on shame and guilt. And when we look back at the evaluation, people talk about that session as the most life-giving in terms of helping them to connect with how they're really feeling and what they're really thinking about.
I mean, shame and guilt are two very strong emotions. They push you further to hide and feel like you can't reach out for help. So already that image of you on the stage that morning is full of loneliness and isolation. And I think what you've just said, there's this other layer. So my husband and I, we met when I was very, very young. I thought I was going to be single on the mission field, but then he came along. I would have been around 17 or 18 years old. Individually, we'd known we wanted to be in ministry individually. And at that point in time, we had some older Christians in ministry who told us that if we were going to do this thing of coupling up and going into ministry, we needed to be on the front foot of thinking about retirement. I was 18 years old thinking, this is blowing my mind. But the counsel of those older ministry people, as we factored as a couple our budget and the financial decisions we made from the point of being in our early 20s have been so important in being able not only to sustain current ministry, but to relieve us from a sense of worry about our children, a worry about what happens after ministry, where do we live. I'm wondering, in your experience, even at that retirement point of view, I wonder if there's a different kind of debt. There is a financial concern, but you can get to that point in ministry where there's a point where you go, oh, do I actually know what's going to happen after? Do you see that happening as well?
So yes and no, because not every ministry setting is the same. For many of our pastors who serve full time, we have a true pension system where the congregation is paying in 14% of their base salary. And that's money that they cannot cash out. They can't borrow against it along the way. We increase it. So all of our retirees are receiving an 8.5% increase in their retirement payments on July 1 because of our funded status, because of how we manage the plan. So for our pastors that are given access to the pension plan, their retirement is pretty secure. Now, it is how many credits did you buy along the way? Where did you serve? So we have just started a new program because we recognize that many of our pastors of color who serve in historically economically disadvantaged communities are not saving as much early on, and they're losing out on the compounding effect of those credits building up and the increases we offer. So we've started a program to help match their contributions early on in their career, and provided they meet certain economic criteria and the church is located in a historically economic disadvantaged community. I will say that is a completely different experience for many of our Hispanic pastors and our Asian Pacific Islander pastors who are not paid a living wage by their congregations. Many of them receive a few $1,000s a year in compensation. Their primary source of income is coming from outside the church. And so they are more economically vulnerable in retirement than pastors that look and present more like me.
Yeah, I think it goes into the empathy, into the experience of clergy and pastors. There is a wide variety of experiences, a wide variety of setups for ministry. And I think it's really helpful that we keep talking about those differences and to understand how ministries and initiatives such as the one that you lead has such a vision to see that the care for our pastors is understood well across all those differences. Which brings me to the Cornerstone program. So this also fascinated me and interested me. So as a psychologist, I understand the benefit of support groups, and then I understand the benefits of peer support groups. What I really enjoyed listening to your program was how it was set up, how it's being piloted, and some of the things that you're learning. So I wonder if you could introduce us to the Cornerstone program, um, and just tell us about what it was set up to do, and where is it at this point in time.
Sure. So Cornerstones was really the brainchild of Julie Richardson, who is with me in Houston. Julie is our vice president of programs and development. She spent her life doing church camp and youth ministry. And so we've kind of called it church camp for big people. But the intent was to provide resources to allow pastors to self-select into either physical, financial, mental, emotional, or spiritual track. And then depending on which track you were in, you had certain requirements, but you received a grant. So it might be a debt relief grant because you're in the financial literacy track. In the physical wellness track, we've paid for gym memberships. We bought treadmills and exercise bikes for pastors that are in rural communities that don't have access to a place to work out. We've paid for nutrition counseling. People have used their stipends to pay for a year of therapy in advance, or to hire a spiritual director to be able to meet with that person throughout the year. And so the program is really, the criteria and expectations are somewhat self-taught, self-led. So you start down a path and you tell us what you want to do, and then we provide you the financial resources to do that. And then your accountability, which has a lot of grace built into it, is being part of a cohort group that meets monthly for 18 months. So we had 450 pastors come to the kickoff event. 241 of them signed up for the program, and 241 of them, the end of June of this year, will be completing their 18-month cohort group. We just had our planning team come together in January, and we're now in the process of preparing to bring together 550 pastors in September of 2027. And then they'll have the opportunity to sign up for the next round of Cornerstones. Really good feedback, and we're going to create even more options, trying to make sure that everybody has a place that they fit. But I think that the brilliance of Julie and then Fonda Latham, who's on our staff, who oversees the Cornerstones program, I think their brilliance was how the cohort groups were shaped. Originally, our thought was you needed to, if you're in financial literacy, you need to be in a financial literacy cohort. But we also allowed people to state if there was an affinity that they wanted to be in. When I went through my divorce, one of the hardest things to do was to do my first wedding and really question, can I even say these things as somebody whose marriage didn't make it? And so we allowed people to cross-pollinate across the tracks, but focus on their affinity. And we've gotten even more feedback that people really like that. And we want to enhance the selections in order to hopefully attract more people to the program. I work bivocationally. I need to be in an evening group, and I'm on the West Coast. So putting me in a group of people on the East Coast who are 3 hours time difference, and they want to meet at 6 o'clock, I can't do 3 o'clock because I'm a multi-vocation pastor. So we're learning more and more about the flexibility of assembling those groups, but they have been powerful tools for people to hold one another accountable on their journey to wellness. And we've learned some great things. I mean, there are some powerful stories. We had a couple who did financial literacy. As a result of going through the financial literacy, they've collectively lost over 100 pounds. Now, why would financial literacy help you lose over 100 pounds as a couple? Well, they got their financial stress under control. So they were no longer stress eating because they didn't know how they were going to pay the bills every month. They got their food budget under control because they were working with their financial companion, which caused them to make different choices at the grocery store. They were sitting down weekly as a couple and having a first-time budget conversation, which was then leading to the conversation around meal planning and menu planning and what's ahead for the week. So they were there. The pastor was admitted for the financial literacy track to get their financial household in order. It strengthened their marriage. It strengthened their physical health. It strengthened their family life and all of these unintended positive benefits that came out of it. And they're able to share that story with other people in their cohort then, which is then empowering and encouraging other people to think about, what might I do next? Or what other benefits am I receiving because I'm going to yoga every week now? And look, my blood pressure's down, or I'm more focused on my eating, or I took the money that I was paying to go to yoga and I used it to help pay down debt on a credit card. So I actually got out of debt as a result of this. And, so lots of ripple positive.
And with the support groups, I think when I was in the conference, one of the things that I understood was that ability to choose is really important, really significant. People make choices on the group that they want to go to, not just on similarity. Do you think it is a similarity thing, or is it kind of a feeling of it's safe? Or maybe it's both.
So I think so it's multiple things, right? So if I am with somebody who is like me and they have a similar life experience, I don't have to explain. So this is what one of our board members said. She said, when I walk into my cohort group that is all women of color, I don't have to explain what it's like to be a 50-year-old African-American woman in the United States today. I don't have to explain myself and my circumstances. I don't have to explain my upbringing because my story in general is similar to everybody else's story in the room. And I also don't have to code switch and feel like I am being inauthentic to fit into a white dominant culture. So our lessons that we learn from our training with diversity, equity, belonging, and accessibility that we do with our staff also apply to this and have created positive outcomes. Now, for other people, they said, I want to be in a mixed group. And that's okay because that kind of human agency, I think
Yeah.
if I have choice, I've chosen my track, I've chosen the style of group I want to be in, I am more invested now because I'm more empowered to actually do the work that I need to do, as opposed to being told, here's the group you're going to be in. Well, I don't like these people, or I don't know these people, or, we did unknowingly put former spouses in a same group together and help them move, which we were happy to do because we didn't know that they had been previously married.
Yes.
So you're not going to get it right all the time, but
Yeah.
that empowerment, I think, and that choice and human agency has been really critical to people following through, which to me has been the most impressive part. I mean, we're going to measure the outcomes, and we're using a human flourishing assessment to measure the outcomes. We did the assessment on the way in, and we'll do it on the way out. But the commitment that these individuals have made and followed through, to me, has been the most impressive part of this in terms of the work that they have been doing personally and individually and how they are strengthened to continue on in ministry.
Yeah, that's so powerful in a vocation that has not so much empowerment and agency. So much of your life is dictated by your circumstances. That's actually a really powerful motivation, but also fuel to commit and to show up for one another as well. I like what you said about code switching. We were in a missions conference a couple of years ago, and there was a lady who was a doctor on the field in Africa from Korea. And she was trying to explain why she doesn't actually turn up for all the support stuff that they have for field workers. And she said it's actually more exhausting.
No.
She says, first of all, I have to speak in a different language. It's not even the African language that I'm trained to speak in. You all speak English. So now I'm going to have to speak in that language. I'm going to have to code switch in terms of what is considered restful for me as a Korean female, um, to be in your environment. So I appreciate that when you're in a group where you feel like you can reduce quite a lot of that, you feel not only more comfortable, but you're able really to get into the conversations at a more sort of restful space as well. What do you think is the secret sauce for these groups? We have different denominations in Australia have set up groups, and the chatter that I hear is sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we want to go, sometimes we don't want to go. Is there a secret sauce how this is working?
So each group has been different. Each group has, had some different outcomes. And I think the secret sauce is letting the groups find their way, giving them some guardrails and some guidelines and some resources to get started, but recognizing that everybody's needs are different. And really, it's more about this. I think the secret sauce is the equipping we did for the cohort leaders so that they could lead. And that's one of the things they've asked for. They said, I love being a cohort leader, but I also want to be in a cohort. So the quality of the leader and how much time they have to invest in it, I think has a direct effect then on the outcome for the group. But we'll be doing things in this next iteration because we called this a pilot. We said, we're going to test this. We don't know that we'll do it again. We're locked in. We're doing it again. We're doubling down. We're going to spend about $2.5 million in this next wave to support this. but we're going to provide additional resources beyond facilitation training to the cohort leaders. We used a book by Victoria Atkinson White called Holy Friendships as kind of our model. And Victoria did some training. We're going to have her do additional training, not only at the start, but also at a midpoint check-in. And then we're bringing a chaplain in this next wave to be there to support the cohort leaders, in addition to Fonda Latham, who's on our staff, who was with me in Houston, who is a clinical pastoral counselor and social worker. She's going to be facilitating small groups for the cohort leaders as well to make sure that we're strengthening them. But really, the secret sauce is the way in which you train your leaders to do the facilitation. And everybody's going to get out of it what they put into it. We had some people say, I'm just here for the money. Great.
Mhm.
If we're making a difference in your life and this helps out and you're showing up and checking a box, then you're going to get out of it from showing up and checking into a box. And others have said, this is the most transformational experience I've ever had in my life. And they are super invested and can't wait to sign up for the next round.
And so, do the groups work through material? So each of those streams has a structure to it.
Each of the streams have requirements that you needed to meet relative to, and some of them are more prescriptive, like the financial literacy, because we had an entire financial literacy curriculum and we have a partner, Your Money Line, that does the financial companion piece. It was easy to say, you must do these 5 following things, and here are 20 additional options, and here's a book that everybody has to read and discuss. For, say, the spiritual wellness and mental health individuals, less prescriptive, they would say on their grant application, I would like to find a therapist in my local community, and I just need financial resources to help foot the bill. I want to find a spiritual director, or I want to hire an executive coach to work with me. And I just need that person to foot the bill. So less prescriptive. Our side is to say, have you been showing up and did you follow through and what did you learn from it? As opposed to, here are the 10 self-help books that you must read and write a paper on. And so it depends. And then in the cohorts, they're celebrating wins with each other. And so this was another point of evaluation. We're going to be creating budgets for the cohort leaders to celebrate the victories along the way with the members of their cohort. So we had a senior pastor of one of our largest churches won the Dad Bod Challenge at the gym, physical wellness track. And so outside of the cohort group being like, way to go, there was no other celebration. So in the next iteration, that person's cohort leader will have a bucket of money that they could send a gift card or send a fruit basket or, to celebrate the moment even more so with that individual and to encourage their ongoing work and commitment to the individual work that they're doing.
Looking at Cornerstones now, so pilot phase, and now you rolling out next phase. Is that right? 500 now?
That's our goal, is to have 550 a kickoff event, which will be a clergy wellness event in which we're going to be talking about trauma and call and trauma and story. So how do you, the title's going to be, or the theme's going to be healing the storyteller. And then also talking about the trauma that I talked about that you carry for the community. What do you do with that? Where does it go? How do you reconnect to your own story of who you are? Because I think we lose ourselves. Again, that Todd father, no separation between who I am, and really trying to help them understand practical tools in which they can continue to serve and deal with the trauma that comes with being in these roles.
That is so powerful. I mean, that is a step up from what you shared in the first run. I mean, this goes into some very important and internalized and intrinsic things. That's really interesting. So as you reflect on your own journey and you now have this wonderful opportunity to be part of resourcing pastors now, what have been some of the joys for you in watching this unfold?
The joy for me are hearing the stories. The joy for me was being at our denominational assembly and the cohort groups setting a time to come by our booth, wanting to take a picture with our staff. The joy for me is seeing the results, running into a colleague and being like, oh my gosh, you've lost so much weight. You look fantastic. And they're like, and I'm in Cornerstones and you paid for it. Because I couldn't give you the whole list of who's in and who's, and who didn't sign up, but seeing the impact and hearing the stories, but also just seeing relationships being built. So Theological education today being primarily online, and I went to a multi-site campus, that was non-residential, so I don't have the experience that my predecessors who were in their 70s had when they went to class together. They all served small churches around the city, and they all lived in the on-campus housing, and so they had meals together, and their spouses knew each other, and I don't have those stories from seminary. Matter of fact, I was the only traditional student in my graduating class. So most of my colleagues were 10 to 30 years older than me, going through seminary as second career individuals. And so I feel like one of the big successes is we're helping people break the isolation. So not only are you isolated in your local community, and you've been isolated and don't have these broader relationships because of the isolation of theological education today, we're now helping you build relationships in a non-threatening way. And so to see the cohorts be in an event together and they're going to lunch because they wanted to spend in time together, to see the cohort saying, do we have to stop? I know you're doing a closing session with us the end of June, but we want to keep meeting. Is it okay if we keep meeting on our own? To see them greeting each other at other events because they're getting to meet somebody in person for the first time that they have built a deep bond with. That's the fuel that keeps people going for ministry. And that's the joy that I find in the outcomes of the work that we're doing. In addition to the millions of dollars in debt that has been paid off by pastors, then as pension fund, our vested interest in this is you've got a great retirement in front of you. We want there to be something left of you to be able to enjoy it.
Wow.
Don't be my mom retired in January. My dad died 9 months later at an early age. Don't be that story. Have something left of you so that you can enjoy this strong, smart, and secure retirement you've been saving for. Enjoy your grandkids if you have them and have some life left beyond the local congregation.
Wow, I think that's a perfect finish, actually. You've given a great encouragement for those of us who will be listening. We may not have the structure or the finances here in Australia yet to roll something like this out. But if you could go back to your ministry person who you were all those years ago, and you could say this to yourself then, because you didn't have Cornerstones, you didn't have any of this wisdom and insight and resourcing. I mean, what would you say to yourself at that point?
I would say don't be afraid to ask the leadership of the congregation for what you know you need. I went in and said, can I trade in my sabbatical for doing my doctorate? As opposed to saying, I'd like to do a doctorate and I'm also due for a sabbatical in another year. And I'd like to be able to do the sabbatical as well. So if I could go back and tell the 32-year-old Todd some advice, the 35-year-old Todd some advice, it would be honest with your leadership and don't be afraid to be honest. I think fear, oftentimes when we're afraid, we're not our best selves. And so we make assumptions, and I think they actually would have been receptive. Now, at the same time, my life has turned out great as a result of making this shift. And I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today and having the impact that I'm able to help facilitate today if I hadn't hit that moment. So good things can come from dark moments, but take care of yourself along the way and it's all going to be okay.
Thank you so much for spending time with me and our audience, Todd. Those are wonderful words for us to finish with, I think. And I hope everybody who's listening will be encouraged to not be afraid to think about what the real needs are that you have. So thank you so much, Todd, for being with me.
It was great to be with you today, and I appreciate the opportunity.